It's this ability to learn new things, to always have a beginner's mind. Early stages, you can either be already aware that you don't know what you don't know, or you can have the arrogance that you think you know everything. And as you get older and wiser, you realize that the more you know, the less you actually know about the world. In the past, we would equate leadership with power. So, like the old saying goes, you are not given power, you take it. With leadership is that you don't ask for it, it's given to you. Having there's like an autocrat, of somebody who holds the ultimate position of power and responsibility, where they say, this is how it's done and this is how you need to do it. It's going the other way.
Thank you so much for clicking on this episode of The Millennial Entrepreneur. The ambition of the podcast is to share relatable stories from young entrepreneurs doing some incredible things to inspire the next generation, including you listening wherever you are. We've been doing this podcast for over 3 years and the ambition has not changed. The only thing that has changed is the scale of where we want to go. We want to bring on bigger guests for you guys to show more and more relatable stories from young entrepreneurs across the world. The majority of you guys watching or listening haven't subscribed to the podcast yet. All you have to do is click that subscribe button wherever you're listening, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, and that will allow us to bring on bigger guests and ask the questions that you really want to hear. And it really is that simple. My name is Sina Sadzadeh. Thank you so much for clicking on the podcast and enjoy the episode. Maria, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. Very well, Sina.
I am thrilled to have you on because you have a podcast of your own as well.
I do.
It's always nice to talk to another podcast host. It must be strange for you being the guest instead of the host this time.
Totally. I mean, my setup is slightly different as well, like having like a desk in between the guests. So there's sort of like couchy, more leisurely vibe. But it's good. It's good.
Yeah, I did one the other day where I was the guest and it wasn't a couch vibe. It was like 2 chairs and the microphone was coming from like behind me. And it was like here. I was like, what's going on? Like,
it's good to put yourself out of your comfort zone every once in a while. So, yeah.
I really want to talk about leadership because your podcast is about, well, the title is An Anatomy of a Leader. Do check it out. And you also work to recruit C-suite individuals. And what I'm interested in is, as young people listening, I guess, what is leadership and how do they work on it? So we'll start off with what is leadership?
Mm-hmm. Well, you don't really mess around, get straight to the good stuff. What is leadership? Leadership is essentially being a head of a business, a team of a group of people. To be a leader, you effectively need people to follow you. So that's what leadership in its essence. And my ethos and my philosophy is that everyone is a leader, even if it's just of themselves. So it's focusing on vision, it's focusing on purpose of, creating that kind of like a vision of where are we going when you have a group of people to follow. So it might sound a little bit sort of esoteric and vague to young people, especially. And, one of the comments I get, especially from women who are in senior leadership positions, like, oh, well, I don't see myself as a leader, because I'm like, well, why don't you not? It's like, well, who do you see as being a leader? And they will, it's like Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, I don't know, even like Angela Merkel, people who are in these positions of power, of influence, of leadership, where they're leading countries or billionaires leading huge businesses. I think that is a false idea of what a leader is. You can be a leader of your family. You can be a leader of your, basketball team. You can be a leader of just even of yourself, of your own vision for where you want to go in your life. So leadership is in all of us, and leaders come in all shapes and sizes.
I really want to dig in terms of, I guess, what makes a good leader and how you sort of construct that for yourself. But I guess being more specific in the business space and as well maybe the personal development space, how do you become a good leader?
How do you become a good leader? I think it starts with yourself. I think one of the most important qualities that you really need to hone is self-awareness. So it's realizing, what are you passionate about? What amazing qualities do you have, and how is it helpful to the world? So a very recent mentor has said to me, think about it in 3 things. What is it that you're really passionate about? What do you feel that like lights your fire every day? What activity that you're engaged in that makes you feel really happy or, enthusiastic? And then take a look and underline the things that you have written, what will be valuable for somebody else. So this idea of it being useful for someone. And then the third thing is like, what can I really realistically put myself into? What am I good at, essentially? So, and having that thing at the very end, because that can be very limiting, especially when you're a young person and you're still kind of figuring out what you enjoy. So I think self-awareness is what makes a great leader. So really focusing on yourself. And I think sometimes it can be perceived that it's a very selfish thing, but I actually think it's not, because it's looking into like, what can I bring to the world? Like, of what value I can bring to the world, as opposed to, I'm just going to do that because I, really enjoy that and kind of like stuff everybody else. So it's the self-awareness piece. The second thing that I talk about is this idea of social intelligence. So being able to understand how groups of people operate. So, say you're at university and I don't know, you're a captain of as I said, basketball team or hockey or whatever. Your position is about engaging and getting the best out of your team and understanding how each individual kind of works amongst themselves. So that's what I mean about social intelligence, being able to understand how groups of people operate. And then the third thing, and I think this is the one that's really underestimated, is continuous learning. So in the beginning, you kind of, early stages, you can either be already aware that you don't know what you don't know, or you can have the arrogance, like the arrogance of youth, which is also helpful in its way, but I'll talk about the negatives, where, if you're kind of arrogant that you think you know everything. And as you get older and wiser, you realize that the more you know, the less you actually know about the world. Yeah. And so it's this ability to learn new things, to always have a beginner's mind. And one of the main qualities that I think we are looking for in leaders of today is this ability to handle criticism and be aware of the things that you don't know and have someone challenge you on the things that you don't know. So I would say those three things. So self-awareness, social intelligence, and continuous learning. So I think that's what makes a good leader.
Got you. And would you say it's different depending on, I guess, the generations? Because things have really changed. If you compare it to, say, leadership, say like even 20 years ago, what it meant to be a young leader. Whereas now there's different things, there's different sort of people saying what leadership is. There's different, I guess, obviously like the social media, and there's different aspects to it. But for you, looking at, I guess, how the term leadership and how, like what makes a good leader, how that's sort of changed in the last sort of few years. Is it generation specific, or has that remained the same?
Our expectations of leaders have changed. So in the past, we would equate leadership with power. So when, some of the guests that I mentioned earlier talking about, well, I see Elon Musk or, whoever, as a leader, I think a lot of it we're referring to somebody who has a lot of power. And power is, like the old saying goes, like let me see if I can phrase it correctly. You are not given power, you take it. So that's how we see power. With leadership, it's the opposite. With leadership is that you don't ask for it. It's given to you. It's being decided by the people who decide to be under your leadership. So I think that is the difference. And I think now we are not so much respectful, but we are moving away from having there's like an autocrat of somebody who holds the ultimate position of power and responsibility, where they say, this is how it's done and this is how you need to do it. it's going the other way. And especially with the rise of the knowledge worker, with, people having jobs that are not necessarily producing a product, lots of services, where you're dealing with information, you're dealing with relationships with people who are experts in their field. And then you have a leader who may not be an expert in that field at all, but their job is to make sure that all of these different parts are operating in this kind of perfect unison. And so that requires somebody who is not an expert in any of those functions, who doesn't necessarily know how to get things done, but how do you get this person to create the right atmosphere and the right conditions that these experts will thrive. And the experts do not thrive on being told what to do because they know more than the person who's leading them. So I think that's the shift.
I think the answer you gave is very sort of interesting, because the way that I see leadership personally is, I think, maybe different to say how a lot of, especially like young males, see it, because they see it with what I've seen is they want to sort of do their own thing. They want to live life on their own terms. And I do too, to some extent. But I think what they see sort of leadership is them being able to tell other people what to do. Whereas I really see it as the opposite way of me being a leader. I don't like, the way that I see it is the people that work for me, I serve them. They don't serve me. It's the opposite. And it's all about responsibility. And it's more of a burden rather than, but it's like a burden that you accept.
Yes.
You see what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not something that, you're not telling them what to do. They're telling you how to serve.
Yes.
That's the way that I see it.
This is something I want to talk about as well. This is something that we see in popular culture as well. So think about the characters like Jon Snow from Game of Thrones, even Harry Potter from, Harry Potter. They didn't want to lead. They didn't want to be the chosen one. They didn't want to, do the difficult thing. They didn't want that responsibility. But something inside them was like, I believe in this so deeply that I have no choice. Like, if I don't do it, other people won't do it. And I think this is something that great leaders do, is that they harness that special thing inside them that kind of tells them where they need to go. It's this access to intuition where you realize like what your purpose is. And again, like finding your purpose, like a whole big subject in itself. But there is that driving force that it's almost like you can't help but do it. Like you're pulled towards it. And we as human beings, we respond to that. And without going down this kind of, again, this like woo-woo, like energy thing, but we have mirror neurons in our brains. So, when somebody is sad or somebody is happy, we, even if, on any kind of level of, autistic scale, we still are able to perceive what the other person is feeling. And I think this is what leaders do, is that they genuinely feel something that other people can like relate to. And I think it's very difficult to put it into words, but it is also a feeling. It's something that when you go to an event, I don't know, you go to a Tony Robbins event and you just feel that energy, you kind of like, it fuels you, you get inspired by it. And not all leaders are, extroverted, kind of like rock star on stage. There are more quiet ways of doing that, but it elicits some kind of an emotion in you that is beyond just, oh, I have to do this thing. It's like, it's something that you also feel like you're compelled to do.
Yeah, it kind of powers you. It gives you the energy, I would say, but it's not something that you thrive in terms of you thrive off being able to tell people what to do. You see, that's the way that I see it, at least.
It's exhausting.
Yeah, it's
like
not an easy thing at all.
It's exhausting. And there is a place for micromanagement in my book when you're dealing with people who are very junior and who are not experienced. And micromanagement can also be looked at as having like more structure, more like detailed, I suppose more detailed explanation of how to do something. But in most cases, you are dealing with individuals who already know how to do something. And so when you have, 200 employees and somebody, all of them knocking on your door saying, how do I do this? Like, you failed. You failed because all you're doing is just fielding other responses. and you're not focusing on the job that you're there to do, which is clear decision making, setting the vision, creating clarity, and empowering people to do the thing you say to do. Like, you can't be and do it all. And I think that happens in smaller organizations where there's fewer people, because like you cannot deal with that much volume.
As you guys know, this podcast is focused on entrepreneurship. So you guys are probably making things happen as an entrepreneur or just starting out. But my question to you is, are you getting enough support to actually lead to your business thriving? If not, you definitely need to join the Federation of Small Businesses. FSB membership gives you access to all those essential documents, toolkits, and resources to help your business operate, as well as a 24/7 legal helpline. There's also essential business cover and many more discounted business essential products and services. There's also a ton of events every month, both online and in person, for you to network with other small business owners across the UK. I speak from experience. Being an entrepreneur is amazing, but it can be pretty lonely at times. As part of FSB, you'll gain more than just your membership. You'll be part of a community that supports you. So if you want to find out more, visit the link in the description. Thanks so much, and let's go on the rest of the episode. Do you feel like there's toxic information out there of what the term leadership is and how to be a good leader, depending on, say, like, because there's so much information out there in terms of entrepreneurship and business. And it's a large reason why I actually started this podcast, because I didn't feel like there was a one source where it kind of showed the truths of what it was like to be a young entrepreneur and how to become a successful one. So it's a big reason why I started this. But do you feel like there's sort of toxic information out there around how to become a leader in this generation?
No, I don't think so. At least I don't see it, actually. Not about the term leadership. In fact, if anything, I see more positive change in how we talk about leadership in terms of, the empathic, emotionally intelligent leadership of somebody who listens, somebody who is there to get the best out of people, to create psychological safety in teams. So, and then there are lots of thought leaders talking about this topic, which is a lot more people focused. So I think there is more of a shift in that. So no, I don't see that.
Okay, that's interesting. No, I was interested to hear your take, because that's one aspect of entrepreneurship, and I was wondering whether you've seen that sort of in a toxic aspect. Do you think the definition or like what makes a good leader differs based on like gender at all? Because you sort of alluded to it a little bit at the beginning. So what makes a good leader as a man? What makes a good leader as a woman?
Personally, no, I don't. However, there is a lot of studies that show how we perceive female and male leaders is different. So, a man who is direct, who can be a little bit abrasive or a little bit arrogant, is perceived as powerful. Whereas if the woman were to step and do the same thing, she's perceived as aggressive. So there is this gender difference between how certain qualities are perceived. But, being direct is important because you want to say your truth. Being decisive is important, and that could be both men and women. But there is a certain shift in terms of how they deliver that message, which can be misconstrued. And this is something that I'm also trying to figure out, like, how do we challenge those beliefs and how do we change that? Because, when I ask some even male guests on the show, it's like, well, what makes a good leader? Or, what is even masculinity? Or like, what is a good man? And then I'm getting all of the same qualities of what would be good qualities in a woman. I'll tell you what, like recently I saw this TikTok, and it was, you may have seen it, and it was a, woman who's a mother, and, her son comes to her and it's like, oh, mommy, what's manly? And she's like, okay, let's Google it. And then I Googled it as well. So it's like, oh, brave, looks after people, all these like amazing qualities of what is manly. And then, the next part of the sketch is, her daughter's like, oh, what about me, mommy? It's like, oh, okay, of course, I'm not going to forget you. Let me look this up. And she's like, what is womanly, voluptuous, curvy? And it's all of the terms that are associated with being, with what you look like, rather than what you are. And I was like, surely not. So I go on Google and it's exactly word for word. So there is this idea of, how a man presents himself, who is, courageous and brave and, there to, which are all amazing human qualities. And then how a woman is, perceived, which is, her skirt's too short, her hair is the wrong, she's not wearing lipstick, or her lipstick's the wrong color. It's like it's so focused on appearance that we are taking away from what the actual qualities are. So that's something that's important for me on my show, is to highlight that there are so many different role models, that it's not just a man, it's not just a woman, it's, there's all these different types of leaders. And for sure, like, focused on gender, it's something that like really speaks to me, and I get really, really mad about it, more on social media than in real life, because I feel like I'm surrounded by people and leaders who are very aware of that's what's happening. But it's a very sensitive and triggering topic for me.
Yeah, but I feel like in an ideal world, the definitions should be maybe not exactly the same for a man and a woman, but they should be very similar, especially when it comes to context. So like a good leader, instead of like gendering it, a good leader in business should have these qualities, and it shouldn't matter based on if it's a man or a woman, right? But I want to ask this question, not because, but I feel like it's sort of needed. If you are a woman within like a young entrepreneur, women entrepreneur, how can you sort of become a good leader? Because if say the definition is actually different of what makes a good woman leader in business, how do you make sure that you are one and you're not seen as those negative things that you mentioned before?
But caveat, it's like it's not a woman's issue to fix.
I know. But I guess.
But let me answer.
How do you navigate is probably a better way of saying it.
I think what you're trying to say is like, given the challenges in how you're perceived, like what can you do to be kind of like to counteract that? One thing to remember is that it's not all of it is up to you, but there are things that you can take control over. What I find with women is the idea of like self-confidence and self-belief. And that's something that men struggle with, but like I particularly see that in women, of feeling like, oh, I don't belong here, or I have to do everything perfectly well to be able to even like put myself up for a position. I mean, there's studies to show that, women need to have almost like 100% of the qualities to apply for a position, whereas men only need like 60%. And like, okay, I'm going to do it. And so there is this, it's not for everyone. Like I have deep respect for men, and, who, there's amazing male CEOs out there, but there is something about like generally that men kind of don't overthink it so much. They just kind of like, they just go for it. So it's like, well, be confident. I think it's just putting yourself in those positions and just going for it anyway, even if you feel the discomfort. Beyond that, I think I hate to say it, sometimes it's like you just need to park the bias somewhere. Like, don't look to blame. I think like the culture of, oh, it's worked out because of this, or, looking for a fault somewhere, I think that's not really helpful. And I would say look for mentors, and not just female mentors, but male mentors also, that really have as part of their, values, to be able to kind of help more women to get into those leadership positions. But I don't think it's necessarily anything different to what a man should be thinking about either. Work on, I'll tell you one thing that everybody will benefit from, is the ability to first notice and then also work with your own emotions. And I think actually women do this remarkably well, because as biologically different to men, we are constantly going through the different changes in our bodies, how we feel. So we already know how to deal with we're aware of certain emotions that probably, men don't experience. So I think being able to lean into that and work with your emotions is what really will separate you. Because if you're triggered, your team member comes to you and you're like snappy with them, or you are, dismissive of them, it's it's not going to help you, because being able to be a decisive, clear thinker is that ability to deal with your own emotions. And talking about gender differences, there are some studies to show that there is more activity in the female prefrontal cortex, which is our like rational decision-making brain, than in men. So technically, women already have an advantage when it comes to that. So that's just one other thing too.
What's interesting though is that when I have seen like male leaders get emotional, and like their typical sort of male emotions of like anger and being aggressive, they're not seen as sort of badly as when, say, a woman gets emotional in the leadership position, because they're more stuff like maybe sadness or frustration. And like, how do you reconcile that? Because if you're the leader, right, you can sort of construct the business yourself. So how do you ensure that doesn't really happen?
So you're talking about from a female perspective, like how do you ensure that doesn't happen? Or
well, I guess like from there, if as an individual, but also as like a society, like how does that improve?
Good question. How does that improve? Well, I think we need to be aware that we perceive men and women differently when it comes to the expression of their emotions. And yes, when a man expresses anger, we see anger as like, well, he's just being a man. Like, that's normal.
Or passionate.
It's passionate.
Yeah.
And so we see that as a good quality. And then when women express it, and it's like, oh, why is she behaving this way? I mean, this idea that, a man goes to hunt and a woman stays at home and looks after the kids. Well, do the men really just want to go out and be a provider? And do they not want to be a dad and, be a parent to their kids? I have so many men, like very senior men, who not only are defying that, but they are like proactively looking at careers and how to structure their lives so that they can be present. So I think this idea of adopting some female qualities in a man, when we normalize that, then we make massive progress. So, this idea of like a woman acting like a man and hence becoming successful, this has worked, quote unquote, for women in the past, because that was the only way that they can exist within a male-dominated world. It's not working well for women that way. And then women, whether they naturally or not naturally that way inclined, there is this more, I don't know, this idea of like connection, of creating more of the environment that we discussed, like more of that psychological safety of like, well, what do we do in this situation? Or like, how do you get the best out of people? Women do that already very well. They're just not necessarily given credit for it. So I think it's just challenging those gender differences and being aware of it. I mean, one of the things that women talk about over and over is this idea: you're in a room, you're probably one of the few women, if any, maybe you're the only one, and the conversation starts to take place about what should we do. You say something, crickets, and then like 5 minutes later another man will say the exact same thing verbatim, and you're like, wait a second, I've just said that. It's almost like you're not even seen or heard. And what, again, another quality that great leaders do is that they amplify the voices of the people. So if you say like, well, thank you very much, John, for your contribution. That's Tracy just mentioned this earlier. And, I'm really glad that both of you are on the same page here. Things like that. So I think it's calling it out when it's happening and to amplify the voices that are not necessarily being heard.
Yeah, I remember like it's one of the most simple things you can do as a if you want to sort of grow those leadership qualities is just acknowledge your team's contributions, which is like, it seems like such a small thing, but it's something that I've learned in terms of so if someone mentions something, you just sort of say like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and then try to connect it with like what other people have said. But it's those simple things. If you were to build the ultimate leader, this is the interesting thing, because a lot of great, even male leaders have female qualities about them. So I think that's the interesting thing. So like, if you were to build the ultimate leader, you would combine those qualities, right?
I don't believe in one size fits all. So if you're looking for this like one perfect model of what a leader is, I don't think such a thing exists.
Depends on context.
It depends on context. It depends on the team. It depends on the size of, it depends on what the vision is. I mean, there's certain underlying things that all great leaders have, but I don't believe like if you were to, let me write you a list, like almost like a recipe book, and here you go, like apply that. I don't think such a thing exists. I think it's about a person really bringing their own unique selves and connecting with people and being able to bring out the best in people. So I think we all know deep down what we look for in a leader. Like we know that. Like we don't need someone to tell you like, yes, they need to listen. Yes, they need to have empathy. Yes, they need to, know what they're doing. Yes, they need to have, the vision. We know what we want. The question is like, are you that person? Are you doing those things? And I think there's a leader within us all somewhere that we need to bring out.
So let's dig deeper into that. So if it is those variety of different things, and obviously it's based on context as to which one of those attributes and characteristics should be more elevated or, etc. From your experience and sort of, finding CEOs and finding C-suite individuals, this new sort of generation coming in, like young people and graduating or like leaving school, what have you seen as the sort of single characteristic or attribute that's maybe more absent that they can work on? So like that sort of one or two.
There's huge generational differences, like the sort of like Gen Zs, boomers. The one big quality is this ability to be challenged by somebody who is below you. So somebody who is less senior than you, from a different background, is this ability for somebody to challenge you on what you're thinking. And I think the older generations is about that autocrat. Like, you will do as I say because I'm the boss. That was the standard. That was the template of leaders. Gen Zs, they don't like that. They want to make their own decisions. They don't want someone say, okay, you go, you do. Like, why? Or, what about this? Or, have you thought about this? Or like, well, it's just not done. We need people to challenge the standard way of thinking, because we are moving at such a massive pace when it comes to technology that the amount of information that we're consuming on a day-by-day basis is increasing. Like every day you just have more and more and more and more. It's impossible for one person to know it all. It's just not. Maybe it used to be like that in the past. It was, there was a certain limited amount of information that you held and other people didn't. Everyone has access to information, like a limitless amount of information, like the amount of information that you cannot possibly process. And so we need individuals to be like, well, I need to challenge that. And so that one quality needs to be, I take that on board. And, it could be a debate, or it could be like, I will take what you've said seriously. And we have to be very careful here, because there's a difference between being able to be challenged and being incompetent. Because, it's like, oh, if everyone's like saying to you, well, you should do this. And you're like, okay, I'll take that on board. Well, you should do this. I'll take that on board. And they're like, well, then you don't know what to do. There is a difference between not knowing how to take that information and to synthesize and come up with a plan with that group together. So yeah.
So you say the one thing that like young people maybe are missing more is the ability to be challenged.
No, I don't think it's the young people. I think it's the older generation.
Oh, the older generation.
Well, if we're talking about like for the younger generation, I'm not sure. It's too early to say. I think for the younger generation I have to say, I haven't thought about that. I'm going to have to come back to you on that. Yeah. Maybe that's what they need. Acknowledge that they don't know something as well.
Well, I don't know. It's just an interesting one, because as I think like companies have changed a lot within the last like 15, like 10 years, because technology has widened the gap so much in terms of the generations. So I was just interested to hear, like, is there one or two things that this generation really misses compared to the other ones in terms of like what leadership
You know what I think it could be? There is this concept of being like, oh, not everybody wants to be a leader, but this idea that being a leader is like the ultimate thing. Like being an influencer is this, like people listen to what I have to say and I'm important and, people follow what I'm doing. Be a good follower. Be a good follower. You can be a leader in other areas of your life. You don't have to be the leader of a company. You don't need to be the leader of, you don't have to have a multi-billion pound company. Like, be a good follower. Like, what is it being a good follower is, I think we're too fixated sometimes on like this ultimate positions. It's also important to, take direction occasionally. Okay, yes, you can challenge that, but, to listen to somebody who is wise. I mean, I tell you, when I was younger, I hated being told what to do. It drove me crazy. And that's part of my personality. But as I got older, I realized also the benefit of listening to people who know what they're talking about. And this ability to have that critical decision making is like, is this person, do they know what they're talking about? And maybe I should pay attention. So being able to decide like what is misinformation and what is good, valuable information, and like to assess those people on those terms, not just take everything they say as gospel.
That's an answer I didn't expect. I didn't expect your answer for that to be actually the opposite of, instead of thinking that you should be a leader in every aspect of your life, be selective and maybe pick the aspects of your life that you can be a good follower as well. That's not something I expected, but yeah, I completely agree. Yeah. Okay, well, we're going to wrap up the podcast there. I think that's actually a pretty cool note to end on. So yeah, Maria, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you.
How can people stay in touch with you and what you're doing?
Well, you can find me on LinkedIn, probably the best. Check out the show, Anatomy of a Leader with Maria Hvorostovsky, Instagram and TikTok.
All right, fantastic. Well, thank you so much again for coming on. And
Thanks so much.
I'm sure we'll chat very soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Ina.